Today, we're jumping into a 50-year whirlwind that completely reshaped the Malay Peninsula. We're going to see how local conflicts and massive global ambitions smashed together, creating an entirely new state with a legacy that, honestly, people are still arguing about today. All right, let's get into it, and we're going to start with a mystery.
Now, this wasn't some random crime. The murder of this man, James Birch, the very first British resident sent to the state of Perak, well, it's the flashpoint for our entire story. And to figure out why he was killed, we've got to peel back the layers and understand the world he was walking into.
So, picture the Malay Peninsula in the middle of the 19th century. The place was sitting on a gold mine, or actually a tin mine, but all that wealth was just fuel for the fire. The whole region was basically a powder keg of royal feuds and brutal gang wars, just waiting for a single spark.
Okay, so at the very top of the social ladder, you had the Malay sultans. Now, in a place like Perak, there was supposed to be this really complicated system for who became the next sultan. It was meant to rotate between 3 royal families. But in reality, that system was ignored all the time. So when the ruling sultan died in 1871, it kicked off this huge, messy power struggle. You had 3 different guys all claiming the throne, and it just created total political chaos.
And while the royals were busy squabbling over the throne, a whole different kind of war was exploding down in the mud and the mines. See, massive tin deposits had been found, and that drew in thousands of Chinese immigrants looking for work. To survive, they formed these secret societies, and the 2 biggest ones fought tooth and nail for control of the best mining spots. We're talking about all-out gang warfare, which history now calls the Lerut Wars.
Now, what's really interesting here is that these secret societies, the Gihins and the Haisans, were way more than just gangs. They were like a combination of a social club, a protection racket, and a private army all rolled into one for the immigrant workers. But in Perak, their rivalry over who got which piece of land and who controlled the water supply got so incredibly violent that it completely shut down the tin trade. It was pure chaos, and even some of the Malay chiefs started picking sides to try and use the chaos to their own advantage.
So, you've got royal feuds up top, and you've got gang wars on the ground. All this chaos, it wasn't happening in a vacuum. It was making a whole lot of noise, and that noise traveled all the way across the ocean and caught the ear of the biggest industrial power on the planet, Great Britain.
So, why did Britain suddenly care so much? Well, it was kind of the perfect storm. First, their factories back home were screaming for tin to build machines for the Industrial Revolution. Second, the new Suez Canal had just opened, which meant getting ships and troops to Asia was suddenly way faster and easier. On top of that, a new government had taken power in London, and they were eager to wave the flag and expand the empire. Partly because they were terrified that if they didn't move in on Malaya, rivals like France or the Netherlands would. The chaos in Perak wasn't a problem for them. It was the perfect excuse to step in.
And this is exactly how it all went down. You have the succession crisis, you have the Lerut Wars getting completely out of hand, and that pushes one of the guys claiming to be Sultan, Raja Abdullah, to do something desperate. He sends a letter to the British, formally asking for their help to sort out the mess. For the British governor, Sir Andrew Clark, that letter was the golden ticket. He swooped in, called a meeting in 1874, and got everyone to sign something called the Pancourt Treaty. And just like that, the era of British control had officially begun.
Now, this treaty created a system that was, brilliant in a very colonial sort of way. It was called the residential system. The idea was that the Sultan would still be the ruler. He'd keep his title and his palace. But the British would install an official called a resident who would advise the Sultan on pretty much everything that mattered. Taxes, laws, you name it. On paper, it's just advice. But let's be real. When the world's biggest superpower gives you advice, it's not really a suggestion, is it?
And once the British were in, things changed, and they changed fast. We're not talking about a gentle shift here. This was like a tidal wave of change that would completely remake Malaya's economy, its society, and even its physical landscape at a dizzying speed.
And what did that change look like in dollars and cents? Take a look at this number, 21 million. In just 6 years, the revenue generated by the Malay states under British control more than doubled, from 9 million to 21 million straight dollars. That's not just growth, that is an absolute explosion of wealth.
And what was fueling that explosion? You guessed it, tin. Once the British brought stability, European investors and their money flooded in. They brought new technology, like massive tin dredges. Think of them as giant floating factories, just scooping tin right out of the riverbeds. Production went through the roof. Before long, British Malaya was producing more tin than anywhere else on Earth, feeding factories all around the globe.
But who was doing all this work? To power this incredible economic boom, the British basically threw the doors open to immigration. They brought in hundreds of thousands of Chinese laborers for the mines and Indian laborers for the new rubber plantations. This created what historians call a plural society. You had these different communities living right next to each other, but not really mixing. They'd meet in the mines or the marketplace, but then go back to their own separate worlds. And that social setup, it would have consequences that last to this very day.
And the scale of this change was just staggering. Look at this chart. By 1941, the indigenous Malay population made up only about 40% of the people in their own land. Think about that for a second. The entire social fabric of the peninsula had been completely rewoven in just a couple of generations.
So with all of this change, all this money, all these new people, how did the locals feel about it? Well, it's complicated. It wasn't as simple as everyone just rolling over and accepting British rule, not by a long shot. The response was a mix of quiet cooperation and sometimes very fierce resistance.
And a huge part of the problem came right back to that Pangkor Treaty. It was like two people signing the exact same contract, but reading completely different things. When Sultan Abdullah asked for protection, he was thinking, great, I'm getting a bodyguard to help me beat my rivals. The British were thinking, great, he just handed us the keys to the kingdom. When the treaty mentioned advice, the Sultan thought he was getting helpful suggestions. The British meant it as a command. This was a massive misunderstanding just waiting to blow up.
And the guy who walks right into this ticking time bomb is James Birch, our man from the mystery. And let's just say he did not have a light touch. He came in and immediately started making aggressive changes. He took over tax collection, which wasn't just about money, it was the main source of power and influence for the local Malay chiefs. Then he abolished something called debt slavery, which was a traditional part of their society. He basically steamrolled local customs, stripping the Malay elite of their power, their wealth, and their authority, all in the name of giving advice.
And so, we finally have the answer to our mystery. On November 2, 1875, while he was taking a bath in a river, James Birch was killed by men loyal to a local chief. His death wasn't random at all. It was a direct, violent response to policies that were seen as a full frontal attack on the entire Malay way of life.
After Birch's murder, the British realized that just using force wasn't going to work. His successor, a man named Hugh Low, was the complete opposite. He was tactful. He actually learned to speak Malay, he took the time to understand the local culture, and he worked with the Malay rulers instead of just trying to bulldoze them. Hugh Low is the one who finally made the residential system stick, not through force, but through diplomacy.
So, let's step back. After 50 years of intervention, of tin booms and treaties and violence, what was the final result? Well, the legacy the British left behind in Malaya is profoundly complex. It's a messy mix of development and dependency, of new order and old resentments. You can really think of it like a balance sheet. On the positive side, politically, they did end the endless civil wars. Economically, they built railways and roads and generated incredible wealth. Socially, they brought in modern medicine. But on the negative side, the sultans and chiefs lost all their real power. The economy became dangerously dependent on just two products, tin and rubber. And the society they built was deeply divided, with different communities living largely separate lives. So in the end, what do you call it? Was it progress or was it exploitation? The British brought stability, but they took control. They created wealth, but they decided who got to keep it. They built a modern state, but on a foundation of social division. There is no simple answer, and that's exactly why this slice of history is so fascinating and so important for us to understand today.